What were the forces that got us to this point where suddenly, 10 years ago, there wasn't anything even close to the level of this being the avenue of potential choice? So, Arin, let's start with you.
To the question of, how did we get here? Maybe the biggest thing that I've observed is that 14 years ago, when I first started doing this type of work, as I heard someone on another panel earlier say, they had to explain what Nearshore was. I had to explain sometimes what Ruby on Rails developers were. Maybe everybody knows that by now, but that they could be found in Latin America and that there was a strong culture for software development and how Nearshore would benefit them in managing, in working with developers in other countries, but in an agile way, which was our specialty. And so that was, our initial sales pitches were primarily around, yes, agile can be done remotely, and it's better if you're a US or Canadian company to do it with teams in Latin America. But now at this point, in the last 4 or 5 years, with everything that's changed, all the different shocks that we've had, there's no I haven't had that conversation in years. People know what the term nearshore is. They're comfortable with remote work. They're comfortable with doing agile and software development in a remote fashion and across borders. So the landscape is totally different than 14 years ago.
How we got here, I'd say, is because of the internet. Work can be done anywhere. And so companies have been able to build a global workforce to get things done anywhere in the world just as easily as they get things done at home. And I guess my slice of expertise will be talking about how the payments world has not evolved, has not caught up yet to the world of work. Many of our payment systems were built in the 70s, and they're still largely the same today. But in comes, the advent of blockchains, which let you basically send value around the world for as little as a penny and as low as a second, very securely.
I think what we're seeing is the change that needed to happen. The way that I see how we got here was simply a paradigm change. I think I'm part of that generation that probably, with my name, will probably give you an example. My name is Pablo Miller. The most Spanish name followed by the most English name. My grandfather was a professor at Cambridge, a UK one. My Colombian grandfather was in the countryside, several girlfriends, the whole Latino thing. And I grew up in a society which it was us and them. I'm the Latin kid, there's the UK kids. What happened after the pandemic was that we simply accelerated what needs to be done, is that it's not about us and them, but it's about localizing the workforce. And what I'm starting to see is that, the pandemic happened, remote work happened, you could be working anywhere in the world. 3 years in, we're starting to see a maturity of that. And, that guy in the beach doesn't really work out. What happens is that big corporations actually have a percentage of their workforce go offshore, is centralized. And what's happening is that engineering manager that maybe wasn't to the level of a Silicon Valley engineering manager 3 years in is. And what we now need to look at with companies such as Zero Hash and myself is we need to talk about retention, because these guys are highly skilled, highly needed, and very important. So what organizations need to do is they need to de-risk this.
Right.
And, folks are not just interested now in working for a big multinational. Folks now need to be treated the same in California, in Bogota, in Peru, and in Lima.
It surprises me in a way that you have to declare retention, retention should have been baked in. And I've thinking about this recently. I just wonder the origins of global outsourcing and where it all began. And I don't know if engineers were really celebrated the way they should have been. I don't know. What do you think, Arin?
Well, as an engineer myself, I celebrate myself. So I think we're celebrated. I think at times we're certainly celebrated, and sometimes the compensation matches that, and sometimes it doesn't, perhaps. But I think I think engineers are often looked too much upon as kind of a delivery mechanism, for something that the business wants. And if you then combine that with the dynamics of offshoring or nearshoring, that sort of bias towards what the engineer is capable of doing or what their role is can be exacerbated. And so I think a key in retention and in this more flat global economy that we have is making sure that regardless of where someone is working, that they are treated as an equal member of the team, that they have strong collaboration and communication abilities within the team. For us, this was what attracted me to Latin America as someone from the U.S. was the ability to work in those same time zones as we all know. But then it's not just about can you both attend a meeting at a reasonable time of day for you, but also are you treating each other as equals in a what is ultimately a very creative collaborative process.
What you're seeing your clients ask you to do in terms of these payments, what geographies you're active in. What if I have developers in Cuba, for example, or Venezuela, or I don't know. And what are some of the more common, how much are we seeing crypto used, things like that?
I would say the best example of why crypto matters is in Argentina today. Their currency is experiencing hyperinflation. And for those who get paid in Argentine pesos versus dollars, they immediately have 20 to 30% lower purchasing power. And they're not alone. There are other countries as well whose local fiat currencies are devaluing month by month. And so where our customers are asking us for help is to simplify the payout from the US to anywhere in the world because their employers are asking for it. Their customers are asking for it. And if you just do like some math, folks in Argentina live this day in and day out, but if you had $1,000 a year ago, that would be worth $2,600 in purchasing power today. And so that's where I guess the crypto world is heading. There's a lot of silliness in crypto, but I'd say those of us who are like seriously providing value in the world, serving customers, employees, vendors in Latin America, and other parts of the world like Turkey and UAE and Egypt, in a currency that remains stable is incredibly important. Globally, the adoption of crypto as a technology is trending like adoption of the internet. And we're kind of in like the late 1990s of the internet in terms of the growth curve of crypto. We move billions of dollars of value for our platforms like Stripe and Shift4 and others. And really where we help platforms go is just where the demand for crypto is the most. So there are 8.3 million people in Mexico who already own crypto. There are 26 million in Brazil who already own crypto, and 93 million in India who already own crypto. And as more and more people hold it and they tell their friends about it, their family about it, they see the real value of holding a stable currency in self-custody. The number grows tremendously. And we're not even at the crazy hockey stick curve.
Are you going to get the 2000.com crash along the way?
Yeah. You could argue 2022 is kind of the...
Oh, you already covered that.
But yeah, I mean, maybe we'll see another one come.
Yeah.
But surely there are hype cycle elements to crypto. There's no doubt about it. But the killer app for crypto right now is stablecoins because, again, local fiat currencies are just devaluing people's hard-earned wages.
So Pablo, let's hear more from you about some of the more innovative things you guys are doing for retention and really breaking some ground.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kirk. So what our vision is at Remoti is that we want to ensure that this gap between, let's say, Latin America and the US is brought together. What does this mean? Is that our vision is that we're building a platform that we're launching this month that an engineer in Medellin, Colombia receives their paycheck and automatically they're able to have access to a 401k here in the US. They will have a digital wallet that they can have savings in stable coins. And number 3, they're going to get access to the most innovative solutions that they can increase their level of English. They can become better coders. And so what this means is that a big organization, now let's say back in the day, they would have a call center or development center in LATAM. They would not have the benefits of the local organization. So we're all about kind of bringing together, localizing the workforce. But most importantly, it's kind of a social mobility movement that, if you're an engineer in Latin America, you have all the benefits, you have all the opportunity to work with amazing talent as managers from the US in Latin America, but you also have the financial freedom as them. And what will happen is that, yes, of course, junior folks, mid-level folks will be cheaper, but there will be that engineer that, is a top 1% engineer that should be working here in New York. But given the fact that they're being paid in dollars, have access to amazing retirement plans, they'll probably stay in Colombia or they'll stay in Latin America.
The first time I've ever heard about a 401k type retirement plan among the, in the nearshore world. It's very interesting. So how did you set that up? And what, I'm wondering, is there an awareness of the value of that? Is there any matching, any of that kind of thing?
Absolutely. So part of the way launching is that from Remoti, we're going to be matching the employees' contributions as well. So the idea here is that, in Latin America, a lot of companies don't even have pension plans. A lot of people buy what we say local, they buy a shop, and that's what they rely on from the rent to live off. So what we want to do is that we want this future digital workforce to be having retiring plans so that as if they're based in Miami, they're based here in the US. So we have built partnerships, and because part of the way that we hire a lot of the folks is actually we hire them from the US, but they're based in LATAM, they're able to then contribute to these schemes.
For us, we're a services provider, but at a boutique size, but working with clients in many countries and working with team members in many countries. And so some of the problems that you described are certainly problems that we would face, and also that we would face in competing for talent if they were to go, say to work directly for a U.S. company without us as a nearshore provider, kind of in between. So things like innovations like that, I think, are really important, along with payment innovations. I completely agree with what Austin said about the payments world is not caught up to the way that we work. We're working in a very innovative, borderless way, but benefits, compensation, payment methods, all of these things have not caught up with that yet. So I think it's wonderful because it should help to keep this industry very competitive and able for talent to stay in their home country should they choose to. I think is a wonderful option.
I met the wonderful folks from Ecuador, and as we were kind of brainstorming over a glass of wine last night, how are we going to get the engineering talent to a good level? And I think with having these sort of products, I'd love to have a look at kind of the top engineers that are based in the US. They're actually Ecuadorians. Right. So imagine if we're able to build an infrastructure for them to come back home and start building, what good looks like, center of excellence. And I think I kind of will motivate a lot of, let's say, the big organizations that are here today to start kind of brainstorming that. It's like, we understand that we need to build and nurture the mid to senior talent, but there's certainly, 1% A players out there. Let's get them back home.
Are the local jurisdictions confused? Are they standing in the way? I mean, there's a tax element always, right? How does that get managed in this crypto world?
What I know is that today we offer tax reporting for U.S. customers and end users in the form of a 1099 DA. My understanding is that the U.S. is a little bit further along in tax reporting for digital assets in particular. But getting paid in dollars around the world should not present, I'd say, a special issue with respect to it.
A lot of the engineers that we work with are already kind of private contractors. They have their own business. So therefore, that they just send an invoice, they get paid, and then they look after the whole local taxes. Of course, if you do EOR and they're a local employee, then you're responsible for the equivalent to Social Security, etc. So yeah, at this stage, if it's EOR, we wouldn't be able to offer that.
Okay. Yeah. That's what you've encountered too?
Yeah, our experience is the same. Absolutely.
What's come up a couple times in our conversations today is the need to be more specialized in delivery of your service. Now, you and I talked about that, Arin. Tell us more about why you think that's so important.
When talking with potential clients about nearshore services, if I tell them, hey, I can help you find great developers in Latin America, but if that's sort of the end of my pitch, and in 2010, when I first started the company, my business partner and I, that was our pitch. That very quickly devolves into purely a pricing conversation, though. And so it ends up being a bit of a race to the bottom. And I don't really like racing to the bottom, and I especially don't like talking pricing. So I wanted to avoid that for sure. And I think the best way to avoid a pure price comparison is through specialization in some form, right? And that could come through specialization in the types of skills that you hire for, which is what we did initially with focusing on Ruby on Rails as a language, which especially at that time was particularly hot, high demand skill, harder to find in Latin America at that time. And so that was our first step in specialization. And then from there, I mentioned earlier, we have a separate brand called WebRTC.Ventures where we build live video applications. We started that in 2015 as another technical specialization that we do. And so in that brand in particular, we are recognized as global experts in it's a very niche technology, but especially since a pandemic, a very important technology. And we're seen as global experts in that. So pricing is not so much in the conversation. We don't really even talk about the term nearshore in that situation, generally speaking. It's just we're really good at this. Most of the team happens to be in Latin America. Because we're really good at this, this is what you need to pay. That's the best type of sales conversation I like to have. And only specialization allows for that. So in my mind, whether you're doing technical specialization or product use case specialization or industry specialization, I think some form of specialization is crucial to avoid a pure race to the bottom on price.
I think we're in a very interesting moment in history. BPO, you immediately obviously think about kind of customer service, call center agents. They leave, you can replace. I think what I'm so excited about is that the people we're offshoring becoming so important in an organization that replacing them is actually very difficult. And so we're seeing this shift in power from the big multinational arriving to these towns thinking we can hire whoever we want, anyone can leave. But now the power's coming to the candidate saying, hey, I am now extremely valuable for you. Look after me. And I think if we look at, we always talked about globalization, but what I'm now really keen to do is talk about localization. So that, down south is actually treated with more respect, have better opportunities. And, in Colombia, it's very sad, but there's a word called el levantado, which means someone that just came out of nothing. And, society still talked about, stage 6 is the richest part of society. Stage 1 is the poorest. And moving up in society was difficult. I'm from the UK. We love it when an immigrant kid moves up and starts business. In Latin America, still like, where did this kid come from? What's happening? What surname are they? When all of a sudden it's like, fuck the surname. They've got the capability. They've got the passion. They've got the willingness to succeed. And all of a sudden now they're in 6-figure salaries, looking after their families and as important as a gringo.
Incredible. Yeah, we love those stories. Thank you very much, panel.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.